The year was 2020, and the world was grappling with a pandemic that had turned life upside down. I, a data recovery specialist, found myself in the middle of the desert, near the Motov aircraft boneyard. My task was simple yet peculiar: retrieve old servers from a warehouse. The government had hired me for a project that seemed mundane at first glance, but little did I know that it would lead me down a path of discovery and horror. As I pulled up to the warehouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The warehouse itself was nondescript, a forgotten relic in the vast expanse of the desert. Inside, the air was stale, and the silence was almost oppressive. Rows of dusty servers lined the walls, each one a potential treasure trove of forgotten data. I set to work, methodically inspecting each server for signs of life. After several hours, I found one that piqued my interest. It was an old boxy unit, covered in layers of dust and grime. I hauled it back to my hotel room, eager to see what secrets it held. As I powered it up and connected my recovery tools, the familiar hum of the machine filled the room. I sifted through the corrupted data, piece by piece, until I found a functioning hard drive. The label on it read Mount Loisena, 1996. Intrigued, I began to explore the data. It contained records from a message board used by residents of a town called Mount Loisena. The name was unfamiliar, but as I delved deeper, I found myself drawn into their world. The conversations were mundane at first, discussions about local events, weather, and everyday life. But soon, the tone shifted. The residents spoke of strange weather phenomena and a peculiar light show in the sky. Among the users were a few key voices that stood out: Eric, who went by the handle E-, and his childhood friend Brian, known as Beacon. They were joined by Michael, or Zip-Zap, who lived in the foothills and was particularly concerned about the unusual weather. Daniel, or Theory Master, was the creator of the BBS software, a brilliant yet bored individual who wrote with a formal tone. Finally, there was John, the quantum ruler, the original owner of the BBS, who now worked local jobs and provided updates on the situation downtown. The more I read, the more I realize that this was no ordinary town. Mount Loisena was experiencing something extraordinary. The mild climate, with its snowfall beginning in mid-November, was now disrupted by a series of bizarre weather events. Residents reported missing objects and corrupted data, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As I pored over the messages, a sense of dread began to build. One night stood out in particular. The message board was abuzz with activity as residents described a unique light show in the sky. Michael mentioned seeing strange pillars of darkness in the foothills, which only fueled the growing unease. The conversations were a mix of fear and fascination, with everyone trying to make sense of the surreal events unfolding around them. As I read on, the sense of dread turned into outright horror. Residents began to lose their faces, not metaphorically, but literally. Pillars of darkness appeared in various parts of the town, leading to the disappearance of objects and even people. The message board users were frantic, their posts filled with fear and confusion. It was as if the town itself was being consumed by an unseen force. The gravity of the situation hit me hard. Here I was, sitting in a hotel room in the middle of a desert, uncovering the last traces of a town that had seemingly vanished without a trace. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. Should I reveal this confidential client data? The implications were staggering, and I knew that once I shared this story, there would be no turning back. I decided to keep digging. The story of Mount Loisena needed to be told. The more I uncovered, the more I felt a connection to the people of that town. Their voices, captured in the digital ether, spoke of a life disrupted and a community facing the unknown. They deserved to be remembered, and their story needed to be preserved. As I prepared to share their story online, I knew I was treading dangerous ground. The government might not take kindly to my revelations, and there could be consequences, but the truth was more important. The memory of Mount Loisena and its residents had to be preserved. It was a story that transcended time, a digital echo of a lost world that needed to be heard. As I delved further into the data from Mount Loisena, the message board's conversations from that fateful night in 1996 became more gripping. It was clear that the residents were experiencing something beyond their comprehension. The air was thick with anxiety and fear as they tried to make sense of the bizarre phenomena unfolding around them. The conversation started with typical small talk about the weather and local happenings. Eric, or E-, was the most active, always starting threads and keeping the discussions lively. His childhood friend, Brian, or Beacon, was a steady presence, offering support and sharing his own observations. The two had a camaraderie that was evident even in their online interactions. Michael, or Zip Zap, lived on the outskirts of town, in the foothills. He had always been the more paranoid one, often talking about the strange weather patterns he observed. That night, his posts took on a more urgent tone. He described a peculiar light show in the sky, colors he had never seen before, dancing and swirling in unnatural patterns. The descriptions were vivid, almost poetic, yet filled with a sense of impending doom. As the night wore on, more residents chimed in. Daniel, or Theory Master, added his usual analytical perspective, dissecting the phenomena with his formal and somewhat detached writing style. He theorized about atmospheric anomalies and possible scientific explanations, but even his logical mind could not fully grasp what was happening. John, the quantum ruler, provided updates from downtown, where the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The posts grew more frantic. Objects were disappearing, not just small items, but entire pieces of furniture, even sections of buildings. Data on computers was becoming corrupted, files turning into gibberish or vanishing altogether. The message board itself began to glitch, with messages sometimes appearing distorted or out of order. The sense of reality unraveling was palpable. Then came the reports of people losing their faces. The descriptions were surreal and terrifying. Residents would look at their reflections or each other and see blank, featureless faces staring back. Panic set in as more people reported the same phenomenon. The fear was contagious, spreading through the message board like wildfire. Eric tried to keep everyone calm, but it was clear he was just as scared as the rest. Michael was the first to mention the pillars of darkness. He described them as towering, shadowy columns that seemed to absorb light, appearing randomly around town. Anything that came into contact with these pillars vanished without a trace. The residents were paralyzed with fear, unsure of where to go or what to do. The once tight-knit community was unraveling, their shared reality disintegrating before their eyes. As I read these posts, a chill ran down my spine. It was as if the town was being erased from existence, one piece at a time. The residents' desperate attempts to understand and combat the phenomena were heartbreaking. They clung to the message board as their last lifeline, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy in the face of unimaginable horror. The message board's activity peaked in the early hours of the morning. The posts were shorter, more fragmented, as if the residents were losing their ability to communicate. The last few messages were almost incoherent, filled with garbled text and frantic pleas for help. The final post was from Eric, a simple "help us," followed by a string of nonsensical characters. And then silence. I sat back in my chair, the weight of what I had read settling over me. The story of Mount Loisena was more than just a series of strange events. It was a glimpse into the collapse of a community, the disintegration of reality itself. I knew I had to keep going, to uncover every detail and share it with the world. The residents of Mount Loisena deserved to be remembered, their voices heard, even if it meant facing the unknown consequences. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was not just about the past. The themes of isolation, fear, and the unknown resonated deeply with the current pandemic situation. People everywhere were experiencing their own versions of Mount Loisena's horror, and perhaps in sharing this story, I could help them feel less alone. I took a deep breath and prepared to dive back into the data, determined to piece together the final moments of a town lost to darkness. The weight of what I had uncovered in Mount Loisena's data was almost unbearable. Each post, each desperate cry for help, seemed to echo in the silence of my hotel room. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself, but the ethical implications were daunting. Revealing confidential client data was against everything I had been trained to do. Yet the story was too important, too harrowing, to be buried in the digital graveyard of forgotten files. As a data recovery specialist, I had always prided myself on my professional integrity. Clients trusted me with their most sensitive information, and I had never breached that trust. But this situation was different. The data I had uncovered was more than just ones and zeros. It was a glimpse into a forgotten tragedy. The people of Mount Loisena were more than just usernames on a message board. They were real, and their voices deserved to be heard. The internal conflict gnawed at me. I spent sleepless nights poring over the data, wrestling with my conscience. The more I read, the more I felt a connection to the residents. Their fear, their confusion, and their desperate attempts to understand what was happening to their town resonated deeply with me. It was as if their voices were calling out from the past, begging not to be forgotten. Meanwhile, the world outside my hotel room was grappling with its own crisis. The pandemic had everyone on edge, and the sense of isolation was pervasive. I couldn't help but draw parallels between the plight of Mount Loisena and the current global situation. People were scared, uncertain, and struggling to make sense of a reality that seemed to be unraveling. Sharing the story of Mount Loisena could serve as a reminder that we were not alone in facing the unknown. One night, as I sat in front of my laptop, I made the decision to continue investigating. The story of Mount Loisena needed to be told, even if it meant risking my career. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, more pieces to the puzzle that would help make sense of the surreal events that had taken place. I had to push forward, driven by a sense of duty to the lost voices of that forgotten town. My determination was further fueled by the realization that the message board itself was a lifeline for the residents. It was their way of connecting, of sharing their fears and finding solace in each other's words. The online community they had built was a testament to the human need for connection, even in the face of unimaginable horror. Preserving their story was a way to honor that bond, to ensure that their experiences were not lost to the void. The deeper I delved, the more I found myself entangled in the residents' lives. Eric, Brian, Michael, Daniel, John, their personalities shone through their posts, each adding a unique perspective to the unfolding mystery. Eric's attempts to keep everyone calm, Brian's steady support, Michael's paranoid but accurate observations, Daniel's analytical approach, and John's updates from the heart of the chaos. All of these voices created a rich tapestry of human experience. But with each new discovery, my fear of the consequences grew. The government had been my client, and I was well aware of the potential repercussions of leaking confidential data. Surveillance, legal action, even threats to my safety. All of these were real possibilities. I had to be careful, to weigh every decision, to balance the need for truth with the necessity of self-preservation. Despite the risks, I knew I couldn't stop. The story of Mount Loisena had become a part of me, and I felt a responsibility to see it through to the end. I took measures to protect the data, encrypting my findings and backing them up in multiple locations. I also started to draft the narrative, carefully piecing together the timeline of events and the residents' experiences. As I prepared to share the story online, I braced myself for the fallout. I knew that once the information was out there, I would be opening a Pandora's box. But I also knew that the memory of Mount Loisena and its residents was worth the risk. Their story needed to be told, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of the unknown. The journey was far from over, but I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The voices of Mount Loisena had given me a mission: to preserve their memory and ensure that their story was not forgotten. As I clicked publish on my first post, I took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever consequences lay ahead. The story of Mount Loisena was now out in the world, and there was no turning back. The tension was palpable as I navigated through the final posts on the Mount Loisena message board. Each entry was a fragment of the town's last moments, a testament to the residents' growing despair. It felt like I was watching a horror film unfold in real time, except these were real people, and this was their reality. The posts from that last night were chaotic, filled with fragmented thoughts and raw emotion. Eric's usual steady hand was faltering. His posts became increasingly frantic, reflecting the escalating terror in the town. "Has anyone seen the pillars up close?" he wrote. "They're everywhere now. I can barely see the sky. What is happening to us?" Brian, ever the supportive friend, tried to maintain some semblance of order. "Stay inside, everyone," he advised. "Don't go near the darkness. We need to stick together." But his words seemed futile against the mounting panic. The pillars of darkness, these towering, shadowy columns, were spreading rapidly, consuming everything in their path. Michael, or Zip Zap, was the first to report something truly chilling. "I saw one of the pillars up close," he wrote. It feels like it's alive. And when I touched it, it's gone. My hand just disappeared. I'm scared, guys." His message sent a ripple of fear through the board. The idea that these pillars were not just consuming objects, but also people was too horrifying to contemplate. Daniel, the theory master, tried to apply his analytical mind to the situation, but even he was at a loss. "This defies all known physics," he posted. "These anomalies, they are beyond our understanding. We need to document everything we can. If we don't survive, someone must know what happened here." His words carried a heavy sense of resignation, as if he was preparing for the worst. John, the quantum ruler, was on the ground in downtown Mount Loisena, providing a grim play-by-play of the unfolding disaster. "The pillars are converging on the town square," he wrote. "People are running, but there's nowhere to go. The darkness, it's swallowing everything. Buildings, cars, people, everything." His updates became shorter, more sporadic, as if he was struggling to stay connected amidst the chaos. The final moments of the message board were haunting. The posts were filled with pleas for help, expressions of love and fear, and desperate attempts to understand the incomprehensible. Eric's last post stood out. "Help us. Please, someone out there, tell our story." And then, a string of nonsensical characters, as if the very fabric of their digital world was unraveling. The silence that followed was deafening. The message board went dark, its last echoes of a once vibrant community now lost in the void. I sat back, my heart heavy with the weight of their last words. The people of Mount Loisena had faced an unimaginable horror, and their story was now my responsibility to tell. In the days that followed, I meticulously pieced together the timeline of events, creating a coherent narrative from the fragments of their final posts. I published the story in segments, each one more harrowing than the last. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People were captivated, horrified, and deeply moved by the tale of Mount Loisena. Some even shared their own theories and experiences, creating a new, supportive online community. As the story gained traction, my sense of unease grew. I knew that revealing this data was risky, and I had taken every precaution to protect my identity and the original files. But the government was not known for its leniency when it came to breaches of confidentiality, and I was prepared for the possibility of being tracked down. One night, as I was reviewing the latest comments and responses, I noticed a peculiar email in my inbox. It was from an anonymous sender, with a subject line that simply read, "We know." My heart raced as I opened it. The message was brief and to the point. "You have revealed too much. Cease your activities immediately, or there will be consequences." I sat there, staring at the screen, the words blurring before my eyes. The threat was clear, but so was my resolve. The story of Mount Loisena was out there, and it was too late to turn back. I took a deep breath and continued my work, knowing that the residents of that lost town were counting on me to keep their memory alive. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. But I was determined to see it through. The voices of Mount Loisena had become a part of me, their story intertwined with my own, and I would not let them be forgotten. With the ominous email still fresh in my mind, I forged ahead, undeterred. The story of Mount Loisena had struck a chord with many, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I began to compile the final pieces of the narrative, ensuring every detail was meticulously documented. The residents' voices deserved to be heard, and their story needed to be told in its entirety. As I published the next segment, the online reaction was immediate and intense. Comments flooded in, ranging from expressions of horror to deep empathy for the residents. People were captivated by the mystery of Mount Loisena, and many shared their own theories about the pillars of darkness and the disappearing objects. Some even speculated about government cover-ups and supernatural explanations. The story had taken on a life of its own, and the community it created was both supportive and inquisitive. Amidst the public's fascination, I couldn't ignore the looming threat from the anonymous email. I took extra precautions, using encrypted communications and securing my data with multiple backups. The sense of danger was ever present, but so was my resolve. I continued to engage with the audience, answering questions and providing additional context. The connections I formed with readers were a testament to the power of shared stories, and I found strength in their collective support. One night, I received a message from a user named Whisper, who claimed to have information about similar phenomena in other locations. Intrigued, I arranged for a secure conversation. Whisper revealed that Mount Loisena was not an isolated incident. Other towns had experienced strange occurrences, though not as severe. The patterns were eerily similar: strange weather, disappearing objects, and pillars of darkness. Whisper provided documents and data that added credibility to their claims, painting a broader picture of a potential cover-up. As I sifted through Whisper's information, a chilling realization dawned on me. Mount Loisena might have been a testing ground for something much larger. The thought was terrifying, but it also fueled my determination. I began to cross-reference Whisper's data with the information from Mount Loisena, creating a more comprehensive narrative. The story was no longer just about one town. It was about uncovering a hidden truth that spanned across multiple locations. The more I shared, the more the story spread. Media outlets picked up on the tale, and soon it was being discussed on podcasts, news programs, and social media platforms. The increased visibility brought both positive attention and heightened scrutiny. I received more messages of support, but also more threats, both anonymous and from known sources. It was a delicate balance, maintaining transparency while protecting myself and my sources. Despite the threats, the online community rallied around the story. People from all walks of life contributed their skills and knowledge, helping to piece together the puzzle. Some were researchers, others were tech experts, and a few claimed to have insider knowledge. The collaborative effort was both humbling and inspiring. The story of Mount Loisena had grown beyond my initial findings, becoming a collective investigation into a hidden and terrifying reality. The government's response was swift and predictable. I received several official warnings, and my online presence was closely monitored. There were attempts to discredit my findings, labeling them as conspiracy theories. But the evidence was compelling, and the public was not easily swayed. The community that had formed around the story was resilient, pushing back against attempts to silence the narrative. As the story continued to unfold, I realized the importance of preserving the original data. I partnered with several digital archivists to ensure that the records from Mount Loisena were safely stored and accessible. We created multiple redundancies, ensuring that the information could not be easily erased or corrupted. The digital archives became a repository of truth, a safeguard against those who would prefer the story to be forgotten. The journey was exhausting, both mentally and physically. But the sense of purpose kept me going. The residents of Mount Loisena had become more than just names on a screen. They were a part of my life, their story intertwined with my own. Every new discovery, every piece of the puzzle that fell into place, was a step closer to honoring their memory and ensuring their voices were heard. As I prepared the next segment for publication, I reflected on the journey so far. The story of Mount Loisena had grown beyond anything I could have imagined, drawing in people from around the world. It was a testament to the power of storytelling, the importance of remembering the forgotten, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of the unknown. The road ahead was still fraught with danger, but I was more determined than ever to see it through. The voices of Mount Loisena would not be silenced, and their story would not be forgotten. The day after the story of Mount Loisena gained widespread media attention, my life changed dramatically. The initial thrill of sharing such a significant tale quickly gave way to a stark reality. I was now a person of interest. The government's response, though predictable, was more aggressive than I had anticipated. Official warnings turned into direct threats, and I knew I had to tread carefully. I began noticing subtle changes around me. There were cars parked outside my house for longer than usual, and unfamiliar faces appeared in my neighborhood. My phone calls occasionally had strange echoes, and emails would sometimes glitch as if being intercepted. The sense of being watched was unnerving, but I had anticipated this. I had prepared for it. Despite the increased scrutiny, I continued my work. The community that had formed around Mount Loisena's story was stronger than ever. We set up secure channels of communication, using encryption and anonymity tools to protect our identities. The collaborative effort grew, with more people contributing their expertise and resources. We were united by a common goal: uncovering the truth and ensuring it could not be erased. One evening, as I reviewed the latest findings, I received another message from Whisper. This time, it was a direct warning. "They're closing in on you," it read. "Be careful who you trust. They will try to silence you." The message was chilling, but also a reminder of the stakes involved. The story was too important to abandon, but I needed to be more vigilant than ever. I took steps to secure my physical safety, changing my routine and being more cautious about my surroundings. I moved to a different location, a quiet cabin far from prying eyes, where I could work undisturbed. The isolation was both a blessing and a curse. It provided safety, but also a constant reminder of the dangers lurking out there. Despite the challenges, the support from the online community never wavered. People from all over the world reached out, offering their help and solidarity. Some were researchers with new leads, others were tech experts providing additional security measures, and a few were whistleblowers with insider information. Together, we built a network dedicated to uncovering the truth. The story of Mount Loisena continued to grow, with new revelations adding depth and complexity. We discovered other towns with similar experiences, confirming Whisper's initial claims. The patterns were unmistakable: strange weather phenomena, disappearing objects, and the ominous pillars of darkness. Each new piece of information reinforced the idea that Mount Loisena was part of a larger, more sinister experiment. The government's attempts to discredit the story became more desperate. They released statements calling it a hoax, accusing me of fabricating evidence. But the community was resilient. We countered their claims with hard data, verified records, and eyewitness accounts. The public was not easily swayed, and the story's credibility remained intact. One night, as I was sifting through the latest batch of documents, I received an unexpected call. It was from a reporter at a major news outlet, someone who had been following the story closely. They wanted an exclusive interview, offering a platform to reach an even wider audience. It was a tempting offer, but also risky. Any exposure could lead to greater scrutiny and danger. After careful consideration, I agreed to the interview, under strict conditions. We met in a secure, undisclosed location, and the conversation was recorded anonymously. The reporter was thorough, asking about the origins of the data, the challenges faced, and the broader implications of the findings. It was an opportunity to set the record straight and share the story with a new audience. The interview aired a few days later, sparking renewed interest and debate. The public's response was overwhelming, with many expressing solidarity and demanding answers from the authorities. The pressure on the government increased, and the story of Mount Loisena was no longer something they could easily dismiss or cover up. In the aftermath of the interview, I reflected on the journey so far. The decision to share Mount Loisena's story had brought danger and uncertainty, but it had also connected me with incredible people and a sense of purpose. The voices of that lost town had been heard, and their memory preserved. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but I was more determined than ever to see it through. As I prepared the next chapter of the story, I knew that the journey was far from over. The pursuit of truth is a relentless one, and the consequences, though daunting, were a small price to pay. The voices of Mount Loisena had found their champion, and their story would not be silenced. The story of Mount Loisena had taken on a life of its own. As the public's interest grew, so did the stakes. The pressure on the government to provide answers intensified, and the community that had formed around the story became even more dedicated. It was clear that the journey was far from over, but I felt a profound sense of responsibility to ensure that the truth was preserved and the voices of Mount Loisena were never forgotten. The online community's contributions were invaluable. We created a secure archive to house all the documents, messages, and evidence related to Mount Loisena and similar phenomena in other towns. The goal was to ensure that this information was accessible to anyone who sought it, and that it could not be easily erased or discredited. The digital archivists I partnered with were meticulous, their efforts a testament to the power of collective action in the face of adversity. Despite the increased risks, our network continued to grow. Researchers, journalists, and ordinary citizens contributed their time and expertise, piecing together a more comprehensive understanding of what had happened in Mount Loisena and beyond. The patterns we uncovered were disturbing, hinting at a larger, more insidious agenda. The pillars of darkness, the strange weather, and the disappearing objects were all part of a broader experiment, one that had devastating consequences for those involved. The revelations were both thrilling and terrifying. As we delved deeper, we uncovered more instances of similar occurrences, each with its own unique, but eerily familiar set of circumstances. It became clear that Mount Loisena was not an isolated incident, but part of a series of events that spanned across different regions and times. The evidence suggested a systematic effort to manipulate and control these phenomena, raising questions about the entities behind it and their ultimate goals. As the story gained further traction, I received more invitations to speak about my findings. One such invitation came from a prominent academic conference on anomalous phenomena. It was an opportunity to present the evidence to a broader audience, to gain further insights, and to connect with experts who might help uncover the truth. The conference was held virtually due to the ongoing pandemic, allowing me to participate without compromising my safety. The presentation was a pivotal moment. I meticulously laid out the timeline of events, the evidence we had gathered, and the broader implications of our findings. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many attendees expressing shock and concern over the revelations. Several researchers offered to collaborate, bringing their expertise to bear on the mystery. The conference marked a turning point, solidifying the story's legitimacy and expanding our network of allies. The increased visibility also brought more scrutiny. The government intensified its efforts to discredit the story, but their attempts were increasingly seen as desperate and unconvincing. The public was demanding transparency, and the pressure was mounting. There were rumors of internal investigations and whistleblowers within the government, suggesting that the truth might finally come to light. One night, while reviewing the latest batch of documents, I received a message from a former government scientist who had worked on a project eerily similar to what had happened in Mount Loisena. The scientist, who wished to remain anonymous, provided detailed accounts of experiments designed to manipulate weather patterns and control large-scale environmental phenomena. Their testimony added a chilling layer to the story, confirming our worst fears about the deliberate nature of the events. As I pieced together the final segments of the narrative, I reflected on the journey. The story of Mount Loisena had become more than just a series of strange events. It was a testament to the resilience of a community and the power of collective action in the face of adversity. The residents of Mount Loisena had faced unimaginable horrors, but their voices had not been silenced. Their story had brought people together, creating a network dedicated to uncovering and preserving the truth. The journey had taken a toll on me, both mentally and physically. The constant vigilance, the threats, and the emotional weight of the story were exhausting. But the support of the community and the sense of purpose kept me going. The residents of Mount Loisena deserved justice, and their story needed to be told. As I prepared to publish the final chapter of the story, I knew that our work was not done. The pursuit of truth is relentless, and the legacy of Mount Loisena would continue to drive us forward. The voices of that lost town had found their champion, and their story would not be forgotten. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but I was more determined than ever to see it through. The truth would prevail, and the memory of Mount Loisena would endure.